you who do not know Natalie, at the moment she basically seems to own Radio 4, BBC Radio 4. She has had about 8 series of Natalie Haynes stand-ups for the classics, because she has a classics degree and has made the classics her life, which, if you are not British, you have to understand that most people, there are more people who do the classics who look and sound like our present Prime Minister than there are who look and sound like Natalie. So it's quite an unusual thing for somebody like Natalie to be obsessed with, I think we can safely say. She has her own series. She has written several books. The last one, but one, because every single time you talk to Natalie, she's got another book out. The last but one was shortlisted for the really prestigious Women's Prize. It's called 1,000 Ships, and it's a massive epic. It's sort of a Homerian epic, but about the women in the Trojan War, and it is an amazing read. And the book that she's got out just now is Pandora's Jar, which is all about women in classical mythology. But what I want to talk about here, Natalie, is your first novel, The Amber Fury. But I realised actually it wasn't your first novel. Your first novel was 7 years previously for children.
That's right.
So how come you, because what you do now is so different. How did you start getting in sort of, that'd be 13 years ago, to write a book about children, to write a book for children? What happened?
It was just sort of by accident, really. I had this idea of the opening scene of that book, which is a little girl helping her dad cleaning windows at a big glass kind of fronted building that she doesn't know anything about. And then there are electronic doors. This is key because I pretty well gave myself a breakdown trying to work out how to do a heist when you've got electronic doors, but also cameras and lights that would be triggered I'm like, where do you cut the power? It was like Rafifi or something. And the little girl is helping her dad on some holidays, and a cat suddenly appears inside the windows, and she's so surprised. She's locked them because she needs to clean them, and obviously otherwise they would open because motion sensor. And she unhooks the thing so that the doors will open. And she's so surprised. She says to the cat, "Hello, what are you doing here?" And the cat replies. And I thought, well, if there's a talking cat in it, it's probably going to have to be a children's book. And honestly, that's the entirety of my thought process. So I just wrote the book that had come into my mind. And it's not, I realize that you're not supposed to do it. It's not a great book, it's got structural issues. I would write it way better now. My mom really likes it, but you can argue with my mom over whether or not I'm a genius, but it is going to be like throwing yourself under a knitted bus. I wouldn't bother if I were you. So yeah, and then it just took me a really a kind of chunk of time to be able to write a novel for adults, which is I think what I sort of wanted to do all along. Although actually I have a lot of very young readers, even for want of a better phrase, grown-up books, and I'm always shocked by how young. I think it's because the radio series gets very, people listen to radio in their lives all the time, so their kids grow up with it and they don't realize it's sort of not really for them, because of course if they're listening and they like it, it is for them. I didn't set out to make a radio series that I thought children would like. I'm amazed and delighted that they do. I didn't set out to write novels that I thought teenagers would write their extended A-level essays or degree dissertations on, and yet inexplicably it's happened. So I think I'm quite immature. So I think I'm basically a 15-year-old girl in the body of an adult woman, and so I think maybe that's the reason that I have quite a high resonance with a younger audience. Quite childish, Rachel, you know that.
I would never say such a thing, Natalie. Never. I think we need to be clear though. You were a stand-up comedian, and stand-up comedians are not generally known for their great maturity.
Yeah, I don't know what you want me to say. Yes, that's entirely true. Busted. Yes, it is the case. You are correct. Yes.
So I would say, so it took you 7 years between The Great Escape to then publish your first adult novel. So what made you
book in between times? There was Ancient Guide to Modern Life, wasn't there? That was 2010.
But that wasn't a novel, but it was
right,
it?
It was non-fiction. Yeah, and in the meantime, I was writing for the newspapers. I was writing for the Times. I had a column for the Times for about 5 years, because my stand-up career, I was getting a bit tired, truthfully, of being on tour the whole time. And so I realized I was really struggling to write fiction, as you can tell if you read The Great Escape, and be on tour at the same time. I was really struggling to prioritize, you know, which person to be in the average day, although that has really gone wrong in the last 5 years. I spent my entire life both gigging and writing fiction. Anyway, enough of my appalling capacity for work-life balance. But Ancient Guide came off the back of a column that I wrote for the Times. They asked me to do a piece about modern political leaders and their ancient kind of antecedents, and then Ancient Guide spun off that because it was just one of those pieces. But I always wanted to write novels, and I would have written Amber sooner if I had been able to, and or if I had been able to sell it sooner, because of course the financial crash happened in 2009, I think that's right. And it just became an incredibly difficult, and by incredibly difficult I mean, for me at least, not possible time to sell a first novel. And it was possible for me to sell Ancient Guide, a book which I'm in no way, you know, anything other than proud of. But that I could sell because it was sort of an extension of my
brand,
newspaper column, I suppose.
So basically, so what you're saying is that it took you quite a lot of determination to be able to actually publish Amber Fury. A lot of other people would have given up.
Yes,
and just not got published.
And it was turned down by everyone. I should say that, you know, that the romance of this, I realized that from the outside. One of the things that a stand-up comedian called Dan Evans told me very, very early on in my career was never show any fear and never show any pain. And I absolutely stick with that now. And you know this because we're friends in real life, but also friends on social media. And you know perfectly well that I will never show weakness in a public forum unless it's sort of in the past and I've had time to process it, and then I can say, you know, oh, I found this really difficult, or I was struggling with this, but this, you know, here is how things have got to this point. But I would never, what is it called, vague booking, where you just sort of sit on social media going, oh, everything's awful, oh, nothing, oh, don't worry. I can't do that. I'm incredibly performative in that regard. I would happily tell you off the record how I actually feel, but that will never happen on social media. And that's true of my public accounts, which are run by somebody else. So sorry, disappointing for you if you thought that's not me, it's someone else. She's brilliant, better than I would be.
Matilda's very good at being you.
Amazing.
But I think there's a lot of things. So, you know, a lot of people listening and are maybe in the middle of writing their first novel, and I think they see somebody like you, or they'll see somebody like Ian Rankin, the writer, you know, and like Ian Rankin's a millionaire, and it's like, oh, it's really easy, and you're like,
it's really not easy. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not going down a mine, but it really isn't easy. I wrote Great Escape, and that was quite easy, but it was quite hard. I found a publisher because she had seen me on stage, so that's quite. Whenever young people ask me how they get into publishing, I always say, don't do what I did, because it's a really long, don't do 12 years as a stand-up comedian in order to get a book deal. That's a terrible idea. That's a terrible investment of time and energy. There is, I am certain, a quicker way to do it. I don't know what it is. I'm just saying, don't do what I did. But then I wrote I mean, technically, I guess Amber is my first novel, but she's not my first attempt at a novel. I wrote an entire 80,000 word novel on spec, which I couldn't sell. And then I wrote Amber, and Amber was turned down by loads of people, as I remember. I think in the end there was a bidding war of about 5 or 6 publishers, but there were still, you know, like 10 who said no to it, and that they all hurt, you know, and especially if you go through with the previous attempted book, which is that everybody said no. And God, Rachel, it took months and months and months, and the last person to say no they'd had it on their desk and being read by people for about 3 months. And I just bought this flat, the very flat you can see me in now. And then the day after we'd moved in, I'd gone to Cannes for the BBC to cover the film festival, in the days when the BBC could afford to send people to somewhere. It was like that. I know it sounds like a mythical path.
Yes, that was kind of when unicorns populated the land. And
yes, and they carried us to Cannes to see some films. And I was watching 5 films a day. You start at, I think it's 7:30 in the morning. And it is incredibly mad and glamorous, but at the same time, it's a lot of films to sit. And also, like, sometimes the first one of the day is Almodovar or someone, and you're like, wow, it is early to see the tits of someone I don't know. Goodness gracious me. Is this how we're going to begin the day? Okie dokie. And I sat on the Croisette, and there's nothing for me to eat in Cannes. I've been vegetarian for, you know, more than 30 years. So I basically lived off, you know, brie and tomato baguettes at every meal. For a week, which was fine because I'm perfectly happy. I can eat quite happily bread and cheese every meal for 3 days. It's only on the 4th day I start to pine for something green. Leafy green, Rachel, not gummy green. And And so about halfway through the week, and I was over there with people for work, but we weren't like best friends or anything. They were colleagues. And I had a call from my then agent to say that this last publisher had passed on the book, which has never been published. And I had to just sit there and call my then boyfriend, and just cry and cry and cry in this incredibly glamorous place. And I thought, my God, everyone in the world would think how the Cannes Film Festival, the most romantic place you could possibly, in a way.
But also it's now just broken my heart, and I never want to go back. No, because I generally, I do think so many kind of novice writers or people that want to get novels published they do need to understand that rejection is how it works. It's just part of what goes on.
Of course. And that wasn't the last time I got rejected. I need to put this right out there. Once you've got your first novel published, it doesn't then mean it's all going to be just gravy. I was really lucky with Amber, and she sold for a reasonable amount of money, enough for me to buy a chunk of this flat afterwards in here and in the US. And that was the real deal, and in various other countries. So she was translated into quite a lot of languages. But then my next book, Children of Jocasta, was my first set in ancient Greece book. And again, I wrote that, and everyone was like, well, you wrote your contemporary kind of crimey, noiry kind of, meditation on grief novel with Amber. And now, we're not sure about this. This is kind of weird. What is this?
So why did you do that? Because, I mean, Amber Fury is very much about kind of teaching kind of a thriller about what goes wrong. It's kind of like Greek tragedy, but with teenagers.
It's really like a Greek tragedy. Yeah, it's structured as a Greek tragedy, except I cheated and made it 5 acts. So don't tell anyone that I don't, because obviously anyway. Fine. But anyway, I wanted to write a modern version of a Greek tragedy, and I thought at the time that the way I wanted to do that was by structuring the book dramatically, but writing it obviously as a novel. And I had lived in Edinburgh for about a year of my life, spread across a decade of doing the festival and dating a man from Edinburgh, from Dalkeith technically. And so I knew the city very well. I toured there for so many years. If I was up doing the stand in Glasgow, I would always stay in Edinburgh because that's where my boyfriend's family was. And so I knew Edinburgh so well. I was determined that this book, a lot of Amber happens on. Sorry, I keep looking at it because I have a copy, which almost certainly nobody else does, because I'm not sure. I think it's reprinting at the moment. So this is what it looked like as a hardback. It's very beautiful because I love yellow. I mean, I suppose I think it's still beautiful if you don't love yellow, but there it is.
It's a very, very good cover, but it's a very good book.
She's a looker. Yeah, she's a real looker, isn't she? But I was determined that this book was about, walking, that there were acts of somebody who becomes obsessed with somebody else, and that I wanted those sequences to take place on streets where the weather was terrible. And I love Edinburgh with my whole heart, but that's an easy fit, let's be honest. And the train between Edinburgh Waverley and London King's Cross, which I must have taken, I can't even think how many hundreds of times in my life. And I was determined that these sequences of following unseen would occur in those locations. But you'll note, I'm not sure how many people do, but I bet you noticed that actually very little bad happens in Edinburgh. All the bad stuff happens in London.
Yes. I was wondering about that.
I liked Edinburgh too much to upset it. And the trouble is, I don't want to spoil it for anybody in case you're planning to read it. But there is I don't think it's a huge spoiler to tell you, because you find out on the first page or two that something terrible has happened. But the terrible thing that has happened happens not that far from where I live. And I have literally changed my route. Because Rachel knows this already. I walk or run thousands of miles a year, about 9 miles a day on average. And I changed my route because I felt so guilty every time I walked past it. I am a terrible criminal. I always thought I'd be great because I'm good at planning. But it turns out I'm only a good criminal in like the Columbo sense, that I can plan out what you're supposed to do to make it look normal. What I can't do is live with the guilt. I went the full Lady Macbeth, and I was like, I can't go here anymore. And
I've basically planned a murder in this corner, and I can't.
I genuinely have guilt that I've killed a woman at this particular place. It's terrible, isn't it?
That is actually very funny.
It's a little bit insane, yeah.
Well, I mean, also Edinburgh has its fair share of detective novels and murderers everywhere. So it's not like you'd be missing. It's not like Edinburgh would be particularly upset about a tragedy happening in Edinburgh.
I know, it's my great love.
Ian Rankin kills about 2 people a year there.
I mean, minimum, I would say. You know, he really has notched up he's like the Fred West, isn't he, really, of keeping
of fiction.
Yeah, he is. Such a good writer. There was a point, wasn't there, in the 90s, I think, or maybe the noughties, when something ridiculous like 1 in 6 books Waterstone sold was by him. And it's like, you know what? If that has to happen to anyone, I'm so glad it's him. He's such a nice bloke.
But do you know, he told me that it took he had to publish 13 books before he could even get a mortgage.
Yes, I believe that.
So again, you know, you see him now in like Millionaire and all this, that, and the next thing, but he had to write 13 books before he could get a mortgage.
Oh, in that case, I'm only halfway through my process.
You are. So I wanted to ask about why you then moved from doing what you did in the Amber Fury, which was setting it in modern times, making it a thriller, basing it on a Greek tragedy, to, because you then kind of went in a completely different direction with Children of Jocasta.
Yeah.
Why did you do that? Because you then want to explain about Children of Jocasta and why you went in that different direction.
So Jocasta is set in what my friend, the very brilliant Professor Sarah Churchwell, describes as a counter-mythical universe. So as opposed to counter-historical novels, there's counter-fiction where people write, you know, what if the Germans had won the Second World War? What if, you know, the Romans had never, you know, lost? And what if Constantine had never converted or whatever? And this is a kind of counter-mythical and an interrogation of the Theban saga, which took the story of Oedipus and Jocasta and their children, Antigone and Ismene, and Polynices and Eteocles, and said, basically, well, what happens if we look at the stories around the story that we think we know?
So can you quickly explain, because I know that you live your entire life in the classics.
I do.
But a lot of us don't. Can you quickly explain the Oedipus myth story?
Of course. So the most famous version of Oedipus that we have is in Sophocles' play Oedipus Tyrannus in Greek, Oedipus the King in English. Sometimes people call it Oedipus Rex, which is inexplicable because he's not a dinosaur or Roman. And once upon a time, there is a couple called Laius and Jocasta. Laius is king of Thebes, Jocasta is his queen. The oracle tells them, the oracle at Delphi tells them that if they have a son, he'll grow up and kill Laius and marry Jocasta. And this is extremely extravagantly taboo, even in the ancient world, where marrying things like cousins, which we would consider quite dubious, is not that uncommon. And so they have a child, and that child is taken away by a shepherd to be exposed on the mountainside, on the side of Mount Catharsis, which is one of the most dangerous rural locations in all of Greek myth. It's where Actaeon gets torn apart limb from limb by his own dogs, having been turned into a stag. It's where Pentheus gets torn apart by his own mother, having been turned into a bacchante. And Oedipus, as a baby, therefore, is left exposed on the mountainside to die. His feet are pinned together. That's what you do, I'm afraid, with a baby that you abandon, so they can't crawl anywhere. And that's what his name means, Oedipus, swollen foot, because obviously the pin that goes through his feet leaves them damaged. And then 16 or 17 years later, Laius is killed by somebody, we believe. So hold on.
So first of all, Oedipus doesn't die in this hill. He's rescued by a shepherd.
Tiny Tim does not die, in the words of Muppet's Christmas Carol. Yeah, the shepherd is supposed to leave him on the side of the mountain, but as far as Laius and Jocasta know, that's exactly what's happened, and he is dead. Mm-hmm. And then it is the day of the play. All the action, as with all Greek tragedies, happens in a single day, or almost all Greek tragedies, unity of time, unity of place, one location, one time zone. And we discover at the start of the play that Oedipus, this young man, is married to an older woman, the Queen Jocasta. She's about 16, 17 years older than him. And plague has descended on the city. It's my great plague novel. I timed it terribly because people forgot about it by the time that we got a pandemic.
This plague came.
So inconvenient. Plague has hit the city. And they are told by the oracle that what they need to do is root out the killer of the previous king, of King Laius. And of course, all the action unfolds at breathtaking speed. And it transpires that the killer of the previous king is Oedipus, and not, as they had thought, bandits. And Jocasta works it out actually before Oedipus does, that not only has he killed the previous king, but he is also their child who they thought to be dead. So he has killed his father and married his mother. He has fulfilled the prophecy. She hangs herself. He takes the brooch pins from her dress and puts out his own eyes in an act of autoenucleation, and then he is banished, blinded. It's worth bearing in mind, I did offer a sequel to Ancient Guide to my then publishers, because he does actually have a happy ending in a play called Oedipus at Colonus. And I offered them a sequel, which I was going to call Oedipus Died Happy, but they didn't say yes. But he does have quite a nice ending in the end.
So you decide to take this tragedy and write it from a different angle. What made you decide? What made you decide to do that?
Well, I guess this always feels like a slightly facetious answer, and it honestly isn't. But I grew up in Birmingham in the 1990s, and you didn't get to see very many productions of Greek tragedy there. Sometimes, you know, they might put one on in Stratford and then we could go, but mostly it was Shakespeare. And so I didn't really, my first encounters with these texts was pretty much always as a reader, you know, and a Penguin classic, an edition of 2 or 3 plays, or 4 or 5 plays in the case of Euripides sometimes, it looks a lot like a novel on a shelf. And I'm not sure I really thought about it other than as a book for quite a long time. I was well into adulthood before I saw Oedipus performed on the stage. I'd finished my degree, for absolutely sure. And so I knew objectively that it was a play, but I think in my emotional response, I always felt about it that it was a book. And so when it came to be my ambition to reframe it, and I wanted to tell it from Jocasta's perspective because she only has 120 lines in the play. You know, it's such a, the character of Oedipus in that version of the story is certainly not true in every version of their story. He burns so brightly that everyone around him is sort of in the shadows all the time. And I thought, but the thing is, we're told all the way through the play that he's the smartest man in the room. But she works out what they are to each other before he does. You know, at the start of the play, we're shown it's a perfect Aristotelian moment where every scene, as Aristotle tells us in the Poetics, has to advance the plot and reveal character. And it's the perfect illustration of it at the start of the play, which Aristotle, by the way, thought the most perfectly structured Greek play, and he had a lot more to choose from than we do because most of them haven't survived to us today. We've got 7 plays by Sophocles he wrote between 120 and 150, so just to give you an idea. But the play begins with the chorus coming to Oedipus and saying, we need to sort out what's gone wrong with this plague. Can you send to the oracle at Delphi and find out what we should do? And Oedipus says, I've already done it. I did it days ago. I sent my brother-in-law. He's nearly back now. It's like a 5-day ride. So we know he's way cleverer than us, days cleverer than us. And that's how we find out right at the start of the play. But here's the thing. When it comes to working out who they are to each other, that they are mother and son as well as wife and husband, Jocasta works it out so much sooner than him. She has time to go into the palace and kill herself before he can click that that's what's happened. So she is in fact the smartest guy in the room. It's just you don't notice it because she only gets 120 lines, at least in that version. Well, you know, there are other plays where women get more center stage, other Sophoclean plays, the Electra, I guess, although Antigone is not the lead role in Antigone, but particularly in Euripides plays and also in Aeschylus's Agamemnon, where the lead role isn't Agamemnon, it's Clytemnestra. And so, yeah, when Euripides takes on the story in his play Phoenici, Phoenician Women, it's set after the action of the play by Sophocles, but a very different set of things has occurred. So when in that version of the story, when the revelation has come that they're related in 2 ways, Oedipus is considered the sort of shaming one, and his sons Polynices and Eteocles sort of bang him up into a dungeon in the palace because they're so ashamed of him. But Jocasta doesn't die. She carries on as a sort of matriarch as they share the kingdom between them. It doesn't work out and civil war ensues, but nonetheless she sort of has this kind of queen motherish type role. And so it seemed to me there was something to be done with what happens when you look at these myths that we think we know, and it turns out that we don't, because there are so many different versions of them. And I started that book thinking, how am I going to tell a story that everyone knows the end of? You know, everyone knows the Oedipus story, even if they don't know classics. And then I got about halfway through and I thought, how am I going to tell the end of the story when I don't know how it ends? I was like, damn it, this has all gone wrong. So, yeah.
And also, what made you pivot? What really made you pivot from the Amber Fury to Children of Jocasta? I mean, because it obviously, when you look at it, if you really had wanted to be purely commercial, you would have written another modern thriller.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to know. I have a terrible habit of learning how to do something and then stopping doing it because I can do it now. And what I would really like to do is learn how to do a new thing now. And so I think a little bit of me went, well, I kind of know how to write the book that Amber is, but I don't know how to write the book that Jocasta could be. And so I thought I would learn how to do that. And I kind of about 3/4 learned it, I think. Structurally, it's not bad. But yeah, then I think I probably came into my own writing 1,000 Ships. which is much more complicated because I knew how to write. By that point, I thought, well, I know how to write tragedy. So how am I going to write an epic? It's like, oh, okay, this seems like a good idea. So, you know.
No, because I mean, this is the thing, the difference between Amber Fury, and I really liked Amber Fury, but I mean, I read Amber Fury for the first time a couple of days ago, and I was rereading A Thousand Ships yesterday and today, and you can really see the difference. And I really like Amber Fury, but A Thousand Ships is such a jump. You can really see in how much you've pushed yourself in the kind of 5 years between their publication.
Yes.
How much you've pushed yourself as a writer to really to do something much bigger and much more ambitious.
Yeah, it's so, I mean, Amber was a complicated story, actually.
It was complicated.
Three timelines. It seemed complicated to me until I wrote Ships, and now I'm like, bah, 3 timelines, no problem. But at the time I was writing it, I had index cards because I knew how much information I needed to get across, and I knew structure would be the thing on which it either stood or fell. And so I had 3 different sets of index cards of different colors with information on like the present tense of the book, which is happening, you know, as we're reading it. And then that's narrated by the protagonist. And then there's also her past tense, which has a whole different, it's like, well, is the information in this bit going to appear in her recollection in the present, or is it going to appear in the past? And then there's also a set of diary entries, which are obviously in a sort of more immediate past tense because they're, you know, this happened today as opposed to this happened a year ago. And so there was one point when I had all of these different cards, and they were all in act 1, scene 1, act, you know, 3, scene 2, because I wanted to structure it like a tragedy. And so all these cards were all over the floor, and it's not a big flat. And I suddenly looked at it and thought, if I added string between them, I would have the flat of a serial killer in all films ever. That's the only thing that's missing is the string. It's like, oh no. And so I'm slightly less, you know, now with Jocasta and with Ships, it was all a little bit more manageable. It all took place on my desk. I didn't require the whole floor. And yeah, so I still keep a notebook with, you know, all the photographs and the inspiration, and the, you know, Amber is full of, the notebook for Amber is full of photographs of Edinburgh, which I took up there. I went up a couple of times. I visited a school up there which is where Melancholy once were before they end up at the pupil referral unit on Rankeela. And so I did all of that. And of course, that's a lot harder to do when you're setting something in the Bronze Age. So that's tended to be a more complicated set of imaginings, which is unfortunate because imagining landscapes and things isn't my specialty at all. I have to really struggle to do it. I would happily just have everybody walk into rooms, or not rooms in the case of the ancient world, or some outdoor space, and just talk. I would happily just have piles of emotion talking at each other. But it turns out that's not a novel, so you can't do that.
And how did you decide that what made you decide that you were going to try epic? Was it just, have you spent your life thinking, what is the next big thing that I don't think I can do in my work that I am going to do?
Basically, I have. But also, I'm incredibly unself-aware until it's too late to back out. So I set out writing Ships thinking, this is a really complicated story. And there's going to be, and I didn't realize how big the Trojan women strand would be in it, but I was like, I'm going to tell the story of the Trojan War from the perspectives of all its women. And I was a good 2/3 of the way through, really, before I thought,
shit,
oh, it's an epic. Oh, and as far as I was aware, I was like, so this bit is like the Troades, so that's the tragedy bit, and then the letters from Penelope are like the Heroides by Ovid, and so that, and then I was like, no, hang on a minute. And I'd even started it, and honestly, I had even started it. Horace says of epic poetry that it should begin in medias res, in the midst of things. And the book literally begins with the Trojan horse and the city on fire. I still didn't realize for about another 6 months. You have to understand. And yeah, Rachel's being super polite, but I'm really smart and at the same time really dumb. And I managed to be both of those things at the same, with enormous panache. And mostly because I have quite an alarming manner, people don't acknowledge or notice the second bit, but it's still right there in the mix.
No, but at the same time, unless you, only a fool would have rushed in and thought, I can do epic like 1,000 ships, because as you say, everybody, I do think if you are wanting to write, I do think reading something like the Amber Fury and then go and read 1,000 Ships, and you can see progress. But I do agree with you. You do have to be quite foolhardy to go, I am going to write Homerian epic and it'll be fine.
Yeah,
because
but I tend to embark on everything thinking, well, what's the worst that can happen? I can only fail. And that's actually quite a freeing thing. And in some ways, I think it probably comes to me from stand-up, because obviously failing in stand-up is incredibly intimately painful. You know, it really hurts. People really despise actual you, live and in the moment that you are there to be despised. But to be honest, once you've experienced that, then fewer things frighten you. And you know, it's one of those things where you think, well, what's the worst that can happen? If it's terrible, I'll start again. You know, I wrote Amber and Jocasta out of contract, so they were sold after they were finished, and Ships was the first novel that I wrote kind of to order, and so I kind of thought, well, maybe that would be a pressure, but it was fine. And now I kind of think, oh, I hope I can remember how to write novels, because I signed another contract saying I'd deliver one next September, and I'm like, probably can still do it. We'll find out.
And how do you move on from like taking on an entire epic? Are you going to move on to something more intimate? What are you doing? And once you've done, because you've now done thriller, you've done proper myth, and in terms of this from a different angle, like Children of Jocasta, you've done epic, which is mind-blowingly complex, the structure of 1,000 Ships. I mean, I don't understand why that didn't turn you into a serial killer, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I mean, it pretty well destroyed my life, as books go. Yeah, it didn't quite make me a serial killer, but it made me destroy everything else I cared about except it. So, you know, swings and roundabouts.
You win some, you lose some. But you know, but then if you do spend a lot of your life, the amount of time that you do immersed in Greek tragedy, it's not kind of,
it's always on the cards. Is that what you think?
And it's not really you don't live a Mills and Boons life if you like, if your entire stories are Greek tragedy.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure how what the form genre of the next one will be. It's set in the Bronze Age again, but a bit earlier, and it's a pretty big story, but it doesn't have a cast of characters on a par with Ships. I couldn't possibly, I don't think, sustain that many people again. It really did nearly kill me the last time. And I didn't really notice how difficult that was, because the thing is that Amber made me really neurotic about my then partner because of the kind of awful secret that the protagonist is carrying around with her. So I'd kind of watch it. I still do now when we see each other. I have to watch him leave until he's out of sight, because I'm so terrified something will happen to him. I realize this makes me sound mental, because that book was published 6 years ago and I should well be over it by now, but I still do it because it made me so neurotic writing it. And when I wrote Jocasta, it has a sort of decreasing stage set. You know, it begins with these 3 huge courtyards in this palace, which is a sort of a one-story retelling of Knossos at Crete, but with the kind of sea motifs removed, because Thebes is quite a long way from the sea. But the available space to Ismene, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as the book goes on. So it made me really claustrophobic. And then with Ships, again, I just didn't notice. I am really unself-aware when I'm writing, particularly, but in general probably. It was only when Philippa Perry, the psychotherapist, read it, and she said, I can't believe you've been looking after all these women for so long. And I was like, oh, that's exactly, you know, and it's true. I suddenly realized I've been carrying dozens of women, and loads of them, you know, have survived a war, they're, you know, being trafficked, they're raped, they're, you know, the awful things which happen to them. And it's like, oh yeah, I maybe can't do, and that's why Pandora, the non-fiction book, was the book which followed that, because doing the research for my novels or my non-fiction is pretty well identical. It's all about diving into the texts, doing quite a bit of translation, which makes me really happy. You know, hunting around for artwork, sculptures, you know, vase paintings and things like that, tracking down, you know, tiny fragments of lost plays and things like that. they're pretty well the same. The difference is that for the non-fiction, for Pandora, I just get to do the research and then share it with you, which is a really lovely, fun thing to do. It's, you know, and with the novels, I have to kind of sit and go, right, let's get inside this story. And you go, oh. So yeah, I needed an emotional break.
So you think one of the problems with one of the issues is also that if you're doing something like 1,000 Ships is these characters become so real and you do end up kind of carrying their pain.
Yes.
I can imagine that, and I think it's something that people who write and who want to write fiction need to remember, that these people become real.
Well, they should do, because if they're not real to me, who are they going to be real to? You know, I want you to cry when you read it. I want your heart to break. That's what I'm aiming for. If I wanted to make everyone happy, I could have stayed in stand-up, or indeed, if I wanted to make everyone really happy, I would have quit stand-up. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I wanted to have the capacity to provoke different emotions from that,
and that also, to actually write that can be really emotionally overwhelming. Now, do you remember? I think was it Irving Welsh said that the thing about writing fiction is you spend your time in an empty room with a load of imaginary people that you wish were real, and the thing with script writing is you spend your time in a big room with a load of real people that you wish were imaginary.
I'm entirely with him for that.
Main difference between screenwriting and fiction writing.
Yeah, you'll note I don't write for the screen. I occasionally write for the stage, but only monologues where no one else can get involved.
That seems like quite a good idea.
Yeah, you know, what a stand-up solo lone wolf type figure always. Yeah. Well.
So
anyway.
if you're saying like these things and the effect that they have on you, the problem with that is you can't get away from that unless you're going to be writing constantly real happy Mills and Boons novels. If you are writing things like with tragedy, you can't get away from being that emotionally involved. But
I have to cut it with non-fiction to keep me afloat. I mean, Pandora is like my recovery book. Really, it's like my 12-step program, except there are only 10 women in it, so 10-step program, I guess. But it was a way of engaging with the ancient world and with its female characters, which was no less intellectually rigorous, but which was much less emotionally draining, because I just needed it after writing 3 novels on the hoof, all of which are extremely sad in parts and sometimes in their entirety. I just needed to do something that wasn't quite so painful for a while.
And what made you move from doing stand-up about the classics to writing tragedy?
I didn't ever do stand-up about the classics because I was on the circuit. No, never. You'd think I would have, but I just didn't, because it wouldn't have got me any laughs. I was gigging in, you know, working men's clubs and nightclubs on their off nights, and you know, there was no. You can go and ask the guys at the stand, but I'd been on the circuit for probably a decade before anyone even found out that I, you know, had studied Latin or something. I just never used to talk about it, because what would have been the point? The audience didn't care. You know, they weren't interested. How was it gonna? The whole point of stand-up in lots of ways, especially at that point, I think in the 90s and noughties, was that you were trying to find a way of being familiar to the audience. You didn't want to present yourself, unless you were doing like a character comedy thing, you didn't want to present yourself as someone completely different from them. You wanted to present yourself as one of them, you know. And when I started out as a stand-up, I was basically just a student. And you know, 12 years later when I finished, I'd had to accept, and there were really basic things like, when I'd started out, I would always have like a cardigan tied around my waist. I dressed like a kid because I was a kid. And I remember a promoter, a really nice one called Pete Harris, saying to me, you know, now you're doing this gig, you have to stop doing that. And I was like, what? He said, I know that's still how you dress off stage, but you know, you have to look more authoritative than that. You can't be their kid sister anymore. I'm like, oh. And so I didn't start doing stand up for the classics until Ancient Guide came out. So I started doing live shows to fit around Ancient Guides. That's a decade ago now. But the first series that we recorded for Radio 4 was 2014. So it was only 6 years ago. We've just done 6 series in 6 years. That's my fun other job, to fit them all together.
So what made you? So what's made you? What has made you then, since really the Ancient Guide, to the past decade?
Yeah.
What has made you dedicate the past decade to the classics then, and to the stories of the classics?
They won't let me go. You know, I mean, I did walk away. I walked away. I did my degree. at the same time I did my degree, I was in the Cambridge Footlights, you know, the comedy society that had brought out the Pythons and Fry and Laurie and Emma Thompson, all those people. And I did stand up there, and then I became a professional stand-up comedian, and I didn't think about classics really at all for about 10 years. I think I maybe needed to decompress after studying quite hard for quite a long time. And it just, you know, the siren song of those sirens drew me back in. And, you know, I wrote, I used to kind of, the classics was always like my USP as a reviewer, I think. You know, I reviewed a lot of arts for the BBC for a really long time. And so I was always approaching these things, you know, like, I won't notice if a film is beautifully or poorly shot, but I will really notice if it's well or badly written. And so that was always my vibe, was like, well, how does this fit into an Aristotelian model? How does this work? How does that work? And I was making the odd documentary for Radio 4, which tended to focus on classicsy things, because that's just what I knew about. And you have to have a USP if you want to sell, you know, a program to somebody, otherwise they'll just pick somebody else. Why wouldn't they? And so I guess I had that kind of pulling on me at the same time. And then, you know, when Ancient Guide came out, and I did the, you know, you know this, when you have a book out, you want to go and talk about it because you want to sell it, and that's the only way to do it unless you're already famous, which I definitely wasn't. And then of course it was like, well, yeah, if I go and give a talk, what are the chances that I, somebody who routinely does her homework on the bus, will have written it before she gets there? Not a hope. I will obviously be, you know, making it up as I go along, hoping for the best, winging it, etc. This is, to be fair, I was never like this as a stand-up. I was always incredibly well prepared and really rehearsed. But then I started doing the sort of gigs for Ancient Guide, and it's like, well, I'm not aiming for laughs in the same way, so I don't have to be as rehearsed, I don't have to be as good at it. So actually I can dick around a lot more, I can make it a lot more improvised. And then, you know, the trouble is that once you've opened that box, there's no way the lid's going back on, because you realize you can just have fun. And
so did you find that, like, do you find that when you're writing about tragedy, that quite often going on the stage and having fun is a way to cope with spending the rest of your work life mired in death and blood and tragedy?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I mean, I don't have any problem with there being two different routes to catharsis. You know, one is comedy, one is tragedy, and we get to the same point either way. We're relieved of the feelings of intolerable pressure that awful things bring out in us, right? So we watch tragedy and we sort of rehearse ourselves for the worst points in our life. We see another character going through something that's worse than anything we'll probably ever go through, and we feel like we're learning the sort of roadmap to how we will negotiate our worst versions of things when we get there. With comedy, it's a very different route to catharsis, which is that we basically mock somebody else's pain. We don't share it or learn from it, we just laugh at it. And either way, we end up relieved of the feelings of sadness or anger or anxiety. And it took the book world a little bit of time. I think it was probably till Ships, because you have to say to them, look, the book is sad, but I will come and do a show and it will be funny. And they're like, wait, what? You go, no, I'm going to go back to the beginning. The book is sad, but I will come and do a show and it will be funny. And then, well, all right then. And then, yeah, obviously, because I was doing the radio series at the same time, that's
it became easier.
Well, it's bigger than I am, I guess, isn't it? That's the way that these things go, because the BBC is such a huge provider of material into people's lives. You know, the program gets, I don't know, 1.6 million listeners an episode. I mean, it's just insane. So people come to the live shows often, I think, because they know the radio show, and then they often buy the book because, yeah, and then I guess they must be really sad, because I do say at gigs, I'm like, it is really sad, don't buy that. And especially with Jocasta, I think I felt it really strongly with Jocasta. I was like, it is a sad book, you know, I'm quite sunny, but it's not a very sunny book, so take it, don't buy it if you're sad. My publisher's at the back of the room going, please stop telling people not to buy it. But yeah, I think now people, and Ships has a slightly more has more tonal variation in it probably than my earlier books, because I felt like it was now available to me, writing something as epic, as broad scale as that. It's like, oh, there can be sections of this book which are really funny, and there can be sections of this book which are just devastating, and it can all just about hold in one kind of text. So it gave me the chance to be funny in print, which I hadn't done for a long time.
And yeah, the funny bits I really did like Penelopes' letter to Odysseus, basically. What
They
the
were fun to do.
actual fuck do you think you're doing?
Yeah, she just gets crosser and crosser, and it's so lovely because when I set out to write the for those of you who haven't read it, and why should you have, the story of the Iliad is dealt with in a really small part of this book. It takes about 2 pages, the entire 24 books, because the action of the Iliad is largely men on a battlefield, and so when you tell the story from the perspectives of women around them, it turns out that doesn't actually take that long. It's only 2 months of action, the Iliad. It's a 10-year war, but it's the whole action of the Iliad is less than 2 months long. So it's quite briefly told. And I thought, well, the Odyssey sections of the book, the story of what happens to Odysseus on his way home to Penelope, I will be able to tell that also from the perspectives of all the women in the Odyssey, and this will be great. And I wrote the first chapter from Penelope's perspective, and I confidently expected to do Circe, and it's lucky I didn't, because obviously Madeline's book, Circe, had come out after I wrote 1,000 Ships, but before I published it, so it would have been really quite annoying. But I was fully expecting to do Penelope, Circe, Calypso, you know, Scylla, Charybdis, I don't know. The Sirens, I thought, oh, that would be really nice. I can write them a lovely song for them to, and I wrote the first Penelope letter. I thought there's absolutely no way I'm doing any of this story from any perspective but hers. I just love her so much. And the first one, she's like, my dearest husband. And then by the second letter, because he's gone for 10 years, the second letter's like, my dear husband. And then the third letter's like, husband. And then the fourth is like, what time do you call this? So yeah, she just gets crosser and crosser as the book goes. And by the time you get, the last one is actually quite sad. The last one's not a letter to him anymore. The last one is a prayer offered up to Athene, who brought him home safe. But the penultimate letter, where she's just properly blown her stack,
really getting laid into him. It's very
right.
It's also a very good light relief from so much of the kind of other epic things that are going on.
Yes.
Now, we have 10 minutes left, and I am wondering if there are any questions in the chat, because I haven't looked at the chat. And
yeah, we do have some questions.
So we've got a question from Danielle Rose, who is tuning in from snowy Canada. And she would like to ask you, Natalie, about your experience as a woman working in the classics. Danielle is a classical theatre maker, and she often struggles to convince others or herself that women telling these typically male-dominated stories is important. And she'd love to hear whether you've ever come up against anything similar, and how do you persevere through it?
The thing is, and I feel bad saying this, but it is nonetheless the case, sometimes it's everyone else. Sometimes everyone else is stupid and annoying, and there's no point doubting yourself over it, because sometimes it is them. It's not always them, but sometimes it's them. And actually, the single best thing you can do for yourself is to acknowledge that everyone good has imposter syndrome. Every single person who knows what they're doing and is doing something brilliant is worried that they're probably fucking it up. The only people who don't have imposter syndrome, who are cruising through life going, I'm amazing at this, don't anyone worry, I've got this, those people are sociopaths. Don't hang out with those people. They are dangerous and they're bad for you. So it's okay to feel like you're getting it wrong, but you aren't getting it wrong. And so the best thing that you can do, I think, in theatre, which is, and should be, even, and bear in mind, I'm a stand-up saying this, it's a collaborative business. If you're working with other people who don't make you feel good about how you're working, then you need to kick those people to the curb and find some people who are better, frankly. I worked with some incredible women in Cyprus last year who took 1,000 ships and reclaimed it. And when I say reclaimed it, I mean they literally took it and translated it into Greek, Cypriot Greek. And they did an all-day performance exactly a year ago, because all the memories have come up on my Facebook timeline today and yesterday. And they turned it into an all-day 10, 12-hour performance at Lefkozia International Festival. And it was one of the most intense emotional experiences of my life. This book that had nearly destroyed me, suddenly they sent me a picture, you know, the week before and there were just dozens of women. I can't remember how it was, 28 or 30 or something in the end, but they were all standing up against a white wall at the back of the theatre. Just all these women. I was like, oh my God. And I had to do nothing really for that to happen. You know, these women just took the text and realized it was what they wanted, and they got to do the kind of magical. And I basically just swarmed in and had everyone go, well done you. You did absolutely nothing. I did my bit a year ago. So don't worry. And then they, you know, restaged it in English at the British Museum in February this year. I mean, 2 weeks before lockdown. It seems impossible. It seemed impossible that we were doing it as it was happening because it was so insane and impossible. And then in retrospect, it now seems like I must have imagined the entire thing, but not quite. The version of Hypsipyle I've just written has been for a season of plays based on Ovid's Heroides, so the first 15 poems which the Penelope letters are based on in ships, and indeed the story of Laodamia is also taken from those, and Oenone. I steal a lot from Ovid, man. But that's 15 women, 15 performers, 3 I think directors. So it was always a project that was meant to be very collaborative, very egalitarian. We all got paid the same, whatever it is, 2% of the takings or something, so that it, you know, it's not a big money spinner, but it was a wonderful thing to be able to just create something and see it performed, you know, which you don't get to do very often. So again, that was just a really visionary director, Tom Littler, who runs the German Street Theatre, which is a teeny tiny theatre. They've obviously had to do it by broadcast because of lockdown being on, but that was always their goal. But he had loved the Heroides for a long time. I made a set of films about the Heroides through the first lockdown for 21 weeks, which I now see was quite a large effort to go to. Live and learn. What's that? Read an entire Latin poem every week, and then, yeah, why not? And so, you know, generally I don't set out to do things in theatre because I guess I don't have the energy anymore, and I certainly don't have the patience to negotiate with the kinds of people that Daniela is negotiating with. They bore me and they annoy me, so I tend to write novels because then, you know, it's only you and you. So
you can either learn some patience and remember that it isn't you, it is them, and you have to learn patience, or you can go off and write novels.
Those are a couple of options, but generally surround yourself with people who aren't idiots. Yes, there are brilliant visionary directors. There are amazing women making amazing work in other countries. The Sezon Gunaikes women in Cyprus would be your allies, I have no doubt, because they engage with classical theatre. They've been working on Aristophanes this year, although again they've had to struggle with lockdown too. But there are loads of people making classics inspired theatre in the States. That we've had some interesting requests about doing that production of ships in other parts of the world. I don't know if we'll get to now because obviously everything's got a little trickier. But these women exist. I know it's really difficult because often the gatekeepers are conservative, let's say, when it comes to realizing what women can make and create in terms of classics. But they're not the only people who keep gates.
There are. So it's a case of trying to find your people. And
somebody once asked me a question. Yeah, somebody once asked me a question at a book festival in New Zealand, I think, about how you kind of keep going through stand-up and book writing and all of those things where there's so many doors are shut in your face. And I said then, and I continue to believe it now, an awful lot of my job is banging my head against a brick wall and then pretending it doesn't hurt as I bleed. And I wish that weren't so melodramatic, but eventually the wall does collapse. It's just, you have to, you know, go through a lot and fake it a lot to get there. But yeah, it's not always the most fun. You need nice, kind friends who love you to make you feel all right about it in the meantime. And you need those people who will get together with you and go, yeah, it is them, not you. It's always them, not you. Not always, almost always. It's almost always them, not you.
Now, I have a couple more questions. One of them is from Lisa in Glasgow, and she just wants to ask you how you approach the research for your books and how do you form your characters, because she's really loved the retellings of the classics that you and Madeline Miller and Pat Barker have done. And, you know, if you read them all, you can see how different they are. So she'd like to know how you approach the research and how you form your characters.
I do an awful lot of reading, which I know is true for Madeline as well. So yeah, and not only the text that everyone probably can see in the books. In ships, obviously the Iliad and the Odyssey are part of it. Lots and lots of tragedies are part of it. Aeschylus's Oresteia is the background to the Clytemnestra chapter. Ovid's Heroides is the background to the Laodamira and Oenone chapters. The Troades, the Trojan women, is the central strand of the women waiting on the shore to be divvied up. His Hecabe is the story that we get when we follow her, and so on and so on. So they are all in there. And there are also, you know, trying to find out the story of Gaia, which only gets about 2/3 of a page, I think, in Ships. There's almost no reference to it at all. You have to read, I think it was in the Bibliotheca of Pseudo Apollodorus or something. I mean, it was properly like a real dig to find it. And I really love that bit, so that doesn't concern me. But often what you get is no character at all, just a really like a sentence or 2 sentences of a précis. You're really lucky when you get a story in something like Ovid, where you can actually find a person, or Euripides, because all too often with women's stories, they're not given very much attention.
So how
the
do
joy
you
is
do
that
that?
you get to build them. You get to build them yourself. And that's the kind of fun bit in lots of ways.
So you basically invent them, you make them up.
I literally do make them up. Yeah. No, I literally do. I feel kind of guilty about it. To me, it does seem a bit like lying, but I think technically it's fiction, so it's all actually fine.
But also, how do you do that? Because if you look again, if you look at something like Penelope, what you do very well is she's not a 20. You know, sometimes you see historical novels where female characters are made up, and they're essentially 21st century women who just happen to wake up in like 12th century France.
Well, the good news is I've been immersed in this literature in Latin since I was 12 and in Greek since I was 14. So I've been reading these things for more than 2/3 of my life now. It's, you know, it's a really long time. And so, yeah, I don't always think about the kind of day-to-day stuff is harder really than the characterization. The hard bit is trying to work out what people eat, you know, and things like that, because you realize that in the whole of the Iliad and the Odyssey, I don't think there is any mention, if there is, there's like one, but I think there is no mention of anyone eating fish. The whole of the fucking Odyssey takes place at sea, apart from the bit that takes place on Ithaca, which is an island. And no one eats fish, ever. They only eat meat or cheese. There are about 9 different words for cheese in the Odyssey. It's like, what? And so when you get to that point, you go, well, you know, you kind of have to make a decision. You're like, well, do I give people fish because they must have eaten fish? Or do I give them meat because that's what happens in Homer? And, you know, and then there's a whole separate set of problems because I'm vegetarian. I've got no idea what meat tastes like. I have to ring people like Rachel and Oscar. What's it taste like? Don't say chicken. I don't know what that is either. So yeah, no, it does. If compared with the sheep's cheese of the sheep's owned by a cyclops, what does this taste like, and so on. So yeah, it is quite difficult, but those things, the day-to-day stuff is much harder. And color, oh my god, color is really difficult because the Greeks saw color in a completely different way from how we do, so that's really hard. And then again, you have to make decisions. It's like, do I describe it in the way that they would have described it? But in that case, I sacrifice a lot of detail that the modern reader would miss, and so you have to kind of pick a path and take it, but it is hard.
And it is hard, and it is a constant lot of research, and it's like you have to be constantly immersed in that world to be able to write convincingly about it.
I think so, yeah.
That makes complete sense. Now I have one last question, and Danielle says thank you. That was amazing advice and support. Thank you very much.
You've got this, Danielle. Pom-poms.
Desi has one question, which is, you mentioned a bidding war. How did you base your choice on the publisher, and did you rely on your agent's guidance?
Yes, I did rely on my agent's guidance. Yes.
Completely.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not particularly, I'm really good at numbers, but I'm not particularly, I really like having enough money to pay my bills. I really like not worrying about that, but I'm not particularly interested in money for its own sake. I don't have particularly expensive tastes, unless it's enough money to, you know, buy me a whole new flat. It wasn't. In lots of ways, it's not the most important thing to me. And so really it was just about who kind of loved the book most. And Atlantic, who published Amber, really loved the book. And that made it very easy to say yes to them. And when Pan Macmillan, I jumped ship to write Jocasta because they didn't love that. And Pan Macmillan just really, I went in for a meeting with them, and they were so kind of like, and you know, I needed the money for sure. I don't have a trust fund or anything. My parents were teachers in Birmingham. So that's not, moving to London at all was frankly a fairly expensive business. But you want people who love it, because, the thing is that you really do. And if you don't, you didn't write the right book yet, and you have to go back and do it again. I'm really sorry. But I loved Amber when I wrote Amber. I loved Jocasta when I wrote it. I loved Ships when I wrote it. I always do. I fall in love with the characters. I fall in love with the active storytelling. I fall in love with the readers who will have it. And you can't expect a publisher or an agent to feel that passionately about it, because it's like teachers versus parents, right? They've got loads of you, and you've only got one of it. So it's okay that they don't feel that way, but your book should be capable of being their favorite kid, even if it's not their only kid. They should like it, in the same kind of category, at least, as that, I think. So yeah, I guess I went for the people who loved it the most each time. Yes, which is there's a very sappy answer, but it's true.
No, I think it actually makes a difference, because that, on a genuine thing, it can make a big difference to sales, because you do need an editor who is interested in your book and believes in it, and you need publicity who's interested in your book and think it's good, rather than just going through the motions.
Certainly the American publisher of Ships and Pandora, Erin Wicks, she just loved it the most. It was the easiest choice I've ever made, because when she mailed my agent to say she wanted to, I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, to say she wanted it, the way she spoke about it was like, oh, that's how anyone would want their book to be spoken about. Yeah, of course you can have it. I have to be stopped from getting involved, because I'd be like, just have it. You love it so much. But I just like, no, sit down. Oh yeah, that's right, mortgage. But yeah, I just want people to like the work.
Brilliant.
There's another question from Lucy Ruddiman. Do you still see the stand-up you as separate from the writer you?
That's a really good question, and it's actually quite hard to answer. Yes, in some ways I do. I feel like I'm always the same everywhere, but the truth of the matter is that on stage me is like extra me. It's like me to the max. And writer me, especially if I'm writing a novel rather than fiction, it's like you have to kind of try and remove yourself, really, because so the characters have space. Otherwise everyone would sound like me, which would be appalling. So in a way, that was one of the things that was hardest about dealing with Ships, is that I was writing by day and I was gigging Jocasta by night. So I was kind of being performing girl in the evening and then trying to remove myself. And it's like, well, where do I live? On the train home, basically. That felt like the only bit of the day that was mine. And that turns out to not be enough. So you do have to be careful. The downside to lockdown is obviously that I lost a third of my income overnight because I couldn't perform anywhere. The upside to it is that I have actually been able to spend some time with my own company, not at my desk, and not in front of 200, 300 people at a time. And that's probably better for me as a human person.
Have you really noticed that?
Yes. Do I not seem slightly less mental to you these days?
It's hard to tell.
I know.
To be honest, you seem like, I think because everybody else has got quite a lot more mental, you now seem really normal.
Yes. Do you know what? It's like I've stayed still and everyone else has just, yeah, maybe that is it. Maybe that is it.
That is also what's happened, I think, is like, because the one interesting thing I have found from lockdown is living in middle-class suburban Scotland, where nobody has any emotions, walking past older people and they're all talking really openly about being lonely, which is like the biggest taboo that you would talk about in the street.
Interesting.
And it's really interesting, and they're all talking about, because they're assuming that people are lonely. And a wee before it was, you would be ashamed to admit it, and now you hear, and people are going, I'm like, my God, we become California. It's like all it took was COVID, and like
dial 1-800-avocado. We've all changed.
They all need an avocado and a therapist in AA.
We are unfortunately over time. We've had a bonus 7 minutes from Natalie and all the lovely advice. I just wanted to, for you, Natalie, really just to read some of the thanks that people have been leaving. Danielle Rose from Canada said, thank you very much. The advice and support was excellent. Angie Cairns said, thank you very much. Lisa Armstrong, very much. Larissa Tittle from Melbourne, Australia.
I love Larissa. Larissa, are you here? Where are you? I can't see you.
She's left now, unfortunately, at 2 minutes past.
I love Larissa. Oh, can you mail her and send her my love? I'll mail her.
Well, we are recording it, so we'll send everybody a link.
Yes.
You know, and she'll see this bit.
She's
and then Vera Frucci from Portugal says, thank you very much. She really loved it. Betty Silberstein, also from Portugal. Natalie, thank you so much for sharing your writing creative experience with all of us.
Larissa's in her pajamas. It's all fine. Hey, Larissa, I miss you.
So she's heard you. Lisa Armstrong, really loved every minute. Thank you so much. And then Xanthi Clay, absolutely brilliant, enlightening and encouraging. Oh, there she did say she's in her pajamas. And yeah, so Jan Patience as well, buttoned up in Bardowie. Anyway, so this
she's from Bardowie. She's round the corner from me, so she's in buttoned up middle class Scotland as well.
Well, anyway, so there's been a really lovely wide audience from across the world. That's really great. And you know, Natalie, if there's anything I heard is how prolific you are, no matter the genre, whether it's stand-up, writing, presenting, it's just amazing. And one question I had was, how do you mesh all of this together? I'm sure all of your experience just enrich each genre as you go along.
I guess I don't know how it all fits together. It always looks, I understand, and literally only because of other people's responses, but I understand that from the outside, it looks like I have some incredible master plan and I'm kind of gliding through the world in this enormously efficient way. But actually, I'm basically at my desk going, fuck, what's next? Fuck, what's next? Fuck, what's the entire time. And when anyone says, can you do this completely batshit thing for me? I 100%, thank you, Matilda.
Matilda just written, I can confirm she's like this all the time.
That is true. And whenever anyone asks if I can do a thing, I go, yeah, I can't do it for the next 2 weeks because the next 2 weeks are an unholy hell. Just ask me in 2, and that's the whole time. So I'm putting the next thing in like 3 weeks in the future. And then, so my whole life stays like that the whole time. And yeah, there is no system in place at all. It's an absolute shit show. It's just, you know.
But it's working, isn't it? Because you enjoy, I mean, you're passionate,
so far,
you're enjoying it,
yes.
And it's coming across, you love your characters, you love your theatre, etc. And yeah, why not be like that?
Yeah, I'm crazy lucky.
But why not be like
I could have a work-life balance, but what would that achieve?
It'd be too boring. Too boring. Anyway, we've learned so much from you tonight. Thank you so much. I'm hoping we can have you on again because we are going to be doing a festival sometime in the future. Excellent. In March.
Yes, please.
World Storytelling Day, and we also have other events coming on next year. So our next lot of events for the quarter next year is coming up next week. We'll be putting that on our site, and we definitely want to talk to you some more, Natalie, because I think you've just got so much to offer us. So just on that note, before we go and say a big thank you to Natalie, is we've got our Q&A next week. So if you have any more questions, Rachel, myself and James will be there to help you through answering some of your writing and storytelling questions. We've got Chris Schumacher coming from New Zealand, all the way from New Zealand, to tell us how she manages a writing career for international recognition. And we also, this is special for Christmas, got some paid courses coming up where these are friends of Rachel's, really, in the cooking and culinary and drinking world, where they're putting on how to debone a chicken, how to write the perfect recipe, and they just lovely events if you want to buy gifts for your family and friends and to share some time with them in a different way, because who knows what lockdown's doing to us. So much is done online. So watch out for those they'll be on our site next week. The video we've had with Natalie today is being recorded. It will be up by about Friday. Do come back to Your Story to re-listen or share it with your friends. Invite your friends to join up at Your Story and come and listen back. there are quite a few videos there, but this will be one of our key highlights for the year so far. So Natalie, thank you so much for your time.
It was
and
a
also
pleasure. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Debbie,
Thank
for
you
having
for
me.
thank you for coming.
So
I'm sorry there was no whiskey involved, but there will be next time.
Another time, McCormack, in the words
Next
of
time I will be
Kurgan.
With whiskey will be there.
Deal.
Yeah. So it's unfortunately time to say adieu.
Yes.
And happy writing, everyone. Thank you so much once again, Natalie, and thank you, Rachel, for hosting. We'll see you next week for Q&A. Good
Thanks,
night.
Beverly.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.